Why is this a classic, but this not? Well, standards for a start.
A classic game is usually defined as a game that is innovative, replayable, and good, except for when it isn't. Oftentimes, a classic game is treated as an older game, but if I said Gyromite was a classic, you're going to have some questions. What the fuck's a Gyromite, and why am I tied in this chair? So clearly there's something more to a classic than just being old. Though maybe the most important part of a classic game is its impact. I mean, it's undeniable that games like Pac-Man and Super Mario Bros. Are classics. Mario 64 is a good example of a cultural impact. These games introduced a huge amount of players to games, platformers or 3D platformers in this situation, which makes the game still relevant in modern game conversations. So if a game's cultural impact is the key deciding factor, then why is Beat Saber or New Super Mario Bros. Not a classic? If I talk to someone who has never been into games, they'll understand what these games are. It's either that one Mario game everyone played, or the one good VR game they tried at the arcade. This also leads to why is Mario Bros. Run Through World considered classics while the new Mario games aren't. Well, other than the irony of a game with new in its title being called a classic, it was released only 1 year after Resi 4, and that is generally considered a classic. It's one of the top 25 best-selling games, beating out all of the original Mario games other than Mario Bros. The original. It brought 2D Mario back to the mainstream, but clearly that isn't enough to be considered a classic. So a classic has to have done something for the first time, or at the very least been the first to do it in a mainstream way. Games like Mario 64 being the first 3D platformer revolutionized the industry with a lack of literacy. Or games like Civ revolutionized games by removing your ability to tell how much time has passed.
It's been that long?
Except if being first to do something is all it takes to become a classic, then why isn't Sticker Star a classic? It was the first shell loaded into the double barrel that with Color Splash killed any hope you would have of a real Paper Mario game. That didn't age well. Is a classic game just an old game?
No!
Because the term a modern classic is thrown around, but it seems to have even less of a definition than classic. But if the age of a game does matter, how important is it? This can easiest be solved by a few questions my doctor asked me at my last physical. First, be honest with me, is Breath of the Wild a modern classic? Second, is Portal 1 or 2 a classic? If your answer to any of these questions was yes, then no, it probably doesn't affect it. Also, if that's what determines if a game is a classic, does that mean that Pac-Man or Super Mario Bros. Weren't classics until a decade later, 2 decades later? How long does it have to be for a game to be a classic if it doesn't release as one? So if age isn't important to making a game a classic, then what does? Does it have to be replayable? Admittedly, Super Mario Bros. 1 on the NES still holds up, but it is not infinitely replayable outside of attempting speedruns. I really don't see a way I'm making this game last a weekend, let alone a summer of daily play. Games like Tetris are incredibly replayable. Is it a classic because of that? Or because of something else? If it's just replayability that matters, then why isn't Minecraft a classic then? If replayability is only partly responsible for making a game a classic, then is it how well the game aged? While games like Super Mario World aged really well, did Star Fox on the SNES or Mario 64 age nearly as well? Whether it's a camera that wins the award for the best drunk fly impression, the games have not aged nearly as well as many of the 2D games before them. There's just a lot more that can go wrong with early 3D games than early 2D games. So maybe it's the uniqueness of the mechanics. This would explain why it's mostly early games that get called classics. It would explain why Mario 64 would be considered, because for all of its flaws, it was the first to many mechanics that became standard. For its camera, it was an improvement over the cameras of the time, but this still doesn't explain if it was the mechanics, then why isn't Mario Odyssey or 3D World a classic? They go through hundreds of ideas and unique mechanics, so what makes 3D World not a classic, but Mario 64 a classic? Is the reason we don't see Mario Odyssey or 3D World called a classic because of them being sequels? Does being a sequel disqualify a game from being a classic? I mean, if I called Mario Party 4 a classic, you're gonna have some questions. Why is Mario Party 4 a classic? And what happened to my kneecaps? Mario Party 4 isn't a classic probably for the same reason for the rest of the Mario Party games. Can it really be a classic if it's a spin-off that has more sequels than Pokemon generations? It seems that if a game doesn't change much between sequels, it is no longer eligible for being a classic. Even more so if it's a sequel itself. For that reason, Mario Parties and the new Soup games aren't really able to be considered classics. They are sequels, and even with all the unique ideas that they may have, in each board or level they aren't classics because they can't be. Because classics have to, at the very least, feel original. And having new in your title is a nice way to imply you're plagiarizing
yourself.
So does a classic have to be good to be considered a classic? Well, no, not really. I mean, there are plenty of examples that will get a hit put on me, but I'll use the original Sonic for an example. The only good zone is Green Hill Zone. Past that, it becomes way too precise for a game that's supposed to be about building and maintaining speed. Either way, the point is, a game does not need to be good to be considered a classic. It just needs to be a game that a large portion of people need to be nostalgic for. Age is important in making a game a classic. Nostalgia cycles are a big factor in whether or not a game is even able to be able to apply for a classic. A nostalgia cycle is a point in which the primary audience of a piece of media has reached a point where they now have disposable income and desire to replay games. In other words, about 15 years after a piece of media has been released, give or take about 5 years to account for recessions. What the fuck's a modern classic then? Well, it sure as shit wasn't a term to describe classics 20 years ago. Trust me, I checked. I mean, Breath of the Wild is often called a modern classic. It did revolutionize open world games, be a launch title for a Switch, and give a long-awaited reason to own a Wii U. Circling back to launch title thing. A modern classic has to be revolutionary in a modern day, which becomes more and more difficult as time goes on. How is a game supposed to be unique when almost every idea has already been done? It's difficult, especially when I don't think I've seen a single VR game referred to as a modern classic, and those are using the newest of shit. Also, as we start looking towards more modern games, does a game need to be playable to be a classic? This might sound like a dumb question, but think about it. If a piece of media is no longer accessible, is it fair for it to be called a classic if no one cares to or is able to preserve it? So many games rely on servers hosted by the game's owners. Sometimes games have a LAN option or the ability to host your own, but what about the games that don't? Club Penguin is inaccessible. Does that mean it will never reserve the moniker of classic? Is the original Overwatch not able to be a classic 20 years from now because you can't play it anymore? It was Game of the Year. These are the questions we'll see more and more as we see the online games of today unravel. We are only seeing the beginning of it. This will be a problem for the future, and outside of requiring companies to publicize server hosting abilities, this will make it so much gaming history is no longer preserved. What about Mario 35 or the other battle royales from Nintendo? What will happen when those shut down? Or did shut down? Outside of very real questions about game preservation, can a game be a classic if it's a sequel? Will we be calling Mario Galaxy a classic but not Galaxy 2? However, sequels have to be able to be considered classics as both Mario Bros. And Mario 64 are classics. So this begs the question, how unique must a game be from its precursors to be considered a classic? If the new Soup games aren't, where's the line? Sonic 2 is a classic and it looks basically the same as the first game, same as the new Soup games. So clearly being similar shouldn't disqualify them. Though I think this circles back to the problem that a game's feeling is what really decides it. The pure fatigue people had around the new Soup games might cause these games to never be able to enter the gaming Bible of classics. We have one more criteria left, and this one is becoming more and more important as a determining factor. Can an indie game be a classic? You would think, of course it can. However, how many times have you heard Terraria or Minecraft called a classic? Outside of Minecraft's classic versions, which is a retroactive term referring to Minecraft's versions prior to InDev. Minecraft has a weird history, man. Anyways, my point is, Minecraft is the best-selling game of all time, therefore most likely to be able to be considered a classic. And it was originally an indie game, but it's still not called a classic. Maybe it's due to it being newer than most games, but if 5 to 10 years from now Minecraft still isn't a classic, I think we will have our answers. So what we determined, a classic is an old game except for when it isn't, and it mostly just is a result of a large portion of people having a positive feeling about a game that was released. This graph should explain it.
The longer ago those positive feelings were, the less positive feelings are needed, as you can clearly see in the graph.
And a modern classic is a game that was recently released that was so revolutionary and good that it can be considered a classic. Classic games, like everything I seem to keep researching, are incredibly subjective. So with strange sporadic rules that are becoming fuzzier and more difficult to apply than a functional education system, the term can really decide general opinion people have on a title based on whether or not it's a classic. But enough about deciding what a classic is.
I can't wait to play some Color Splash, it's an absolute classic!